Guys, Dehya got a lot of improvements in Natlan, and in general is a character that can't seem to stop getting new teams. Today I will tell you how to play and build her so you can take advantage of her kit to the fullest. Let's go. First of all, as you probably already know, Dehya has two types of playstyles. One where she stays off field and supports the team through defensive utility primarily, and another one where she takes the field to deal damage to opponents through her elemental burst. In Natlan, both of these saw improvements, as pretty much every new character release impacted her in some way. Mainly, her off-field playstyle has much more purpose now, as both Molani and Kinich can integrate her into their teams quite meaningfully. On these teams, Dehya's off-field presence is more useful than just her protecting the team, as these two are carries that hugely benefit from her off-field application as well. To contextualize, at Constellation 0, Dehya's elemental skill will protect allies within a big circular range for 12 seconds in total by transferring half the damage they'd receive to her instead. Secondarily, active characters within the circle will also have increased interruption resistance. Last but not least, on a cooldown of around 2 seconds and a half, the skill will deal coordinated pyro damage within the circle when her allies deal damage. This last part makes her a quite consistent pyro applier, maybe not on the same level as Xianling, because the latter can apply pyro every second on average, but good enough that she can be a great ally for Kinich and Molani. For Molani, this is because she's a Vaporite carry that hits opponents every 3 seconds on average. Her low frequency of attacks makes it so that she doesn't demand much pyro application to begin with, and this is perfect for Dehya. In particular, since Dehya's skill reapplies pyro when opponents get hit within the circle, what will ideally happen is Molani vaporizing off of the existing pyro aura created by Dehya and simultaneously triggering an elemental skill attack that reapplies pyro every time. In a perfect scenario, this allows Molani to trigger Vaporites for her entire rotation, even in AoE, since Dehya's skill hits on a rather wide range. On top of this, Dehya's interruption resistance increase helps Molani a lot in some scenarios, because while the latter has some interruption resistance of her own, she can still get staggered by particularly heavy attacks, which can hugely penalize her combo execution. With Dehya, this doesn't happen, and it's an advantage she has over Xianling for sure. However, there are also cons here, a big one being that since Dehya's elemental skill can reapply pyro every 2 seconds and a half, independently from who attacks, if you play Molani with off-field damage dealers, this can cause some issues. For example, this is a team I suggested in pre-release, with Nahida and Dehya supposedly generating a lot of pyro application through burning. The problem here is that burning constantly deals damage to opponents, and this damage can trigger Dehya's elemental skill effects. In the context of Molani, this is very bad, because if the skill triggers before Molani attacks, that means that after a normal attack, no pyro will be reapplied, and you will basically stop vaping for the rest of the rotation. Luckily, Molani's best team now has Xilonen, one within Kazuha and Sucrose, and a pyro applier. Kazuha and Sucrose don't use their bursts here, and Xilonen doesn't have a field damage, so the only one dealing damage after Dehya uses her skill will be Molani. An advantage I've noticed in this team compared to the Xianling ones is that since Dehya's skill is less intrusive in terms of attacks, it makes it easier to swirl Hydro with Kazuha in some scenarios. Specifically, the tactic here is using Molani's normal attack to apply Hydra on an opponent, then use Xilonen's skill to reduce resistance and activate the scroll set, and then swirl the remaining Hydro aura with Kazuha. With Xianling on team, since her Pyronado is rather long-lasting, in the second rotation it can be a pain to just have Hydra applied on opponents. In Dehya's case, since her skill lasts less at Constellation 0 and is much less intrusive in general, this is not really a problem. Build-wise, I suggest you to use Sacrificial Greatsword on Dehya here. Normally, Dehya's elemental skill is at 20 seconds cooldown, but Sacrificial Greatsword can reset its cooldown every 16 seconds, effectively making the skill cooldown 16 seconds long if you get consistent resets. This makes rotations much smoother. Artifacts-wise, you can either give an Instructor to give Molani nice elemental mastery buffs, or Archaic Petra. I talked about this in my latest Xilonen video. Since on Xilonen teams, the latter will be generating crystallite shards through her geo hits, if someone else on the team is holding Petra, they can pick up the shard to provide elemental damage bonus of its kind. Dehya can do that here for Molani, and that's nice. For the rest of the build, just focus on HP % so you can make Dehya sturdier. For Kinich, it's a very similar case. Dehya helps by increasing his survivability and interruption resistance, but also by applying consistent pyro to supply the main elemental reaction on the team, burning. Starting from the first thing, the survivability thing, some people could have something against its value, because since on these teams you're typically also using Bennett, one could argue that you don't need Dehya's survivability utility on top of his healing. This can be true of course, but it's not always the case. In fact, Bennett's burst has the malus of applying pyro on your active character, which makes opponents able to trigger elemental reactions on you. Melt reactions from Kenki or overloads from the electro-consecrated beast can end up dealing so much damage that you can die even while sitting on Bennett's burst. Dehya helps by halving that damage and preventing one-shots altogether. The one major benefit Dehya has over Xiaolin here and also on the Mualani team is that she doesn't need energy recharge to do what she does. Xiaolin's energy requirements can be absurdly high on these teams and can make them inconsistent at best. In my experience, most people don't like this. The Kinich, Dehya, Emily, Bennett team was the most used Kinich team in the latest database. While it might not be his damage ceiling team, it's very comfy and consistent. Builds-wise, again, you want Dehya to use Sacrificial Greatsword so you can shorten an elemental skill cooldown and make rotations quicker. Artifacts-wise, here she can use Tenacity to middle it, as her skill can constantly activate its effects to give the rest of the team attack % bonuses. For the rest, just give her HP pieces. Of course though, Dehya's usefulness as an off-field support isn't just limited to these two Natlan DPS, but it just so happens that both Mualani and Kinich have low enough pyro application requirements that Dehya fits like a glove here. The same isn't exactly true for characters like Nouvelette and Brisley who have higher elemental reaction frequency, so Dehya has more problems there. She's still viable on those teams, but you will feel like you're running a much more scuffed variant of the teams you could potentially use instead, while it's not the case for Mualani and Kinich teams in my experience. Note that her Constellation 2 can improve the utility of her elemental skill by extending its duration from 12 seconds to 18 seconds. This is great at a glance, but in actuality it's not that needed at the moment because both Mualani and Kinich have rather short damage windows, short enough that even the Constellation 0 version of this skill has no problems keeping them up. It helps more on teams that have longer rotations, like for example the Nouvelette teams, or even teams like Burgeon, where Dehya can be used as a Pyro Elemental Mastery trigger. These are pretty straightforward, just give your Dehya Elemental Mastery artifacts, fill the team with Hydro and Dendro units, and make her trigger Burgeon semi-consistently to her regular elemental skill procs. And this is pretty much it for her off-field role. Secondarily, Natlan also gave Dehya a new on-field use, but before I talk about it, let me remind you that if you enjoy my channel but you haven't subbed yet, please consider doing so because it really makes me notice your support. So, straight up, Shilonen's release made Dehya as a Vaporite carry easier to use. The team is Dehya, Furina, Bennett, and Xilonen, and the concept is having Xilonen, Bennett, and Furina doing a lengthy setup, and then Dehya triggering Vaporites through her burst for around 7 seconds in total. Furina is the only Hydro character that works very well here, because she can produce a lot of Hydro damage and also consistent application for Dehya to vape all of her hits. Mona can sort of replace her, since Dehya's elemental burst window is short enough that Mona's Omen can buffer for the entirety of it, but she has less Hydro application than Furina, and of course none of the damage. Yelan and Xinqiu can't be used because Dehya's elemental burst doesn't trigger their attacks, of course, so Furina is really the only great option. Note that Xilonen didn't exactly introduce the Vaporite teams for Dehya because they were already available with Kazuha, but Xilonen made them much easier to use because she can very easily buff both Hydro and Pyro here, something Kazuha can only do through hit or miss double swerves. The rotation here though is quite specific. Dehya's elemental skill and Bennett's skill to apply Pyro, Xilonen's skill to reduce resistance and activate Pyro buffs through their scroll set, Furina's skill and burst, Xilonen burst to trigger crystallize on the new Hydro aura and buff Furina through the scroll set, then Bennett's skill and burst, rotation around characters for a few seconds to allow them to receive on-field heals, and then Dehya burst. Using Dehya's elemental skill at the start of the rotation is quite important here, as the reason is that otherwise Furina's long-lasting elemental skill can ruin the setup. This only happens from the second rotation onwards. Furina's skill will still be active, and so Bennett's elemental skill won't apply enough Pyro for Xilonen to then trigger a Pyro Crystallize. On the contrary, if you use both Dehya's skill and Bennett's skill, you will generate Pyro Aura for a brief window and make the rotations consistent. Having said this, despite being backed by 3 premier supports, this still feels like a passion project for Dehya. Dehya's energy requirements are absurd. They're around 190 even with both Furina and Xilonen holding Favonius, and this limits her output massively. Things get better if you have Dehya's Constellations or give her a good weapon, but unless you have her a Constellation 6, you won't feel results that are close to modern day carries. Having said that, it's still enough to clear a base if you try hard, and in AoE it feels pretty good because Dehya has nice hit range. It's a nice improvement to her team still, so if you like playing Dehya on field, and if you do, I don't blame you, it's good news for you. Builds-wise, you want to primarily satisfy Dehya's energy requirements, which are around 190 at minimum. This pretty much locks you into using an energy recharge stance on her, and favors the use of the Emblem of Severed Fate set since it has several energy related effects. If you have her Constellation 4, it's less of an issue, because it basically halves her energy requirements, so at that point other artifact set options like her own signature one, the Vorukasha, can become better. Weapons-wise, she got a couple new options since her release. Primarily, Earthshaker, Ultimate Overload and Tidal Shadows are all free-to-play 4-star options that she can use pretty nicely. Alternatively, the good old Mailflower that provides both elemental mastery and attack is quite decent on Vaporites, and 5-star wise, her signature, Beacon of the Red Sea, is of course still her best choice, with alternatives such as Redhorn and Skyward lagging behind. So, as a whole, Dehya improved a lot since the time she came out. Her off-field usefulness vastly improved, and her on-field roles at least make a bit more sense now, I guess. Considering she was once argued as the worst 5-star in the game, this is a pretty remarkable improvement. And with this, I'm done for today. If you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe, and also go check the latest Shilonen video I made. Bye bye.